Hello and welcome back for another episode of Write America. This little literary series is spearheaded by none other than author Roger Rosenblatt in an effort to bridge the great divide in our country through readings and conversations from award-winning, nationally renowned authors and new and emerging writers. My name is Lauren. I am going to be your host for the evening. If you're not familiar with us, Book Review is Long Island's largest independent bookstore. We have a great episode in store for us tonight, featuring readings from writers Patricia McCormick and Michelle Whittaker. If you missed last week's episode with Lloyd Schwartz and Priya Jain, or any of the previous episodes of Write America, you can go to Book Review's Crowdcast channel and watch the recordings at any time. So this episode is also going to be recorded, so if you happen to miss something, you can always go back and watch the replay. Now, before we get started with the readings, there's just a couple of things that I'd like to show you about Crowdcast, just in case this is your first time here on the platform with us. First, there is a blue button right beneath the stream here. If you click that button, it will bring you to bookreview.com, where you can purchase signed copies of Patricia and Michelle's books. There is also a button down here that says Ask a Question. It's down here somewhere. If you click that button, you can submit a question for Patricia and Michelle, which we will get to at the end of the event for during the Q&A. And then I see that some of you have found the chat, so please feel free to drop your comments in there. If you have questions, you can put them in there too. And of course, don't forget your emoji as we would like to see that too. But that's pretty much it. So we're going to get started right now. Our first reader tonight is Michelle Whittaker. Michelle is the author of Surge, which was awarded a finalist medal for the 2018 Next Generation Indie Book Award. She has been published in the New York Times Magazine, New Yorker, Shenandoah, Upstreet, the Southampton Review, and other publications. She's received Pushcart Special Mention, Cave Canem Fellowship, and was the recipient of the 2017 New York Foundation of Arts Fellowship in Poetry. Currently, she is a poetry editor for the American Poetry Journal. Please welcome Michelle Whittaker. Let's get her up on screen. Hi, Michelle.
Hi.
Thank you so much for being here with us tonight. We're excited to see what you have for us.
It's so great to be here. Just thank you, Roger, if he's out there in the land. And thank you to you for helping me with this tech. And it's just so cool to support independent bookstore in Long Island. I'm a fellow Long Islander, and we need those bookstores going.
I couldn't agree more.
Many other things.
Thanks, Michelle.
You're welcome. Okay. Hi, everybody. I'm going to read about 5 poems. 2 poems are, I guess I can classify as elegies. 2 poems are thinking about life, bringing life into being, and 1 poem about the process of creating. So the first one is called In the Afterlight, and it is in memory of my cousin's cousin, whose name is Jordan Davis. He was murdered for playing music too loud at a gas station. And the original title was called The Fortune Cookie because that was part of the catalyst, and the little paper inside said, "What is the speed of dark?" But In the Afterlight is really sort of holding on to his memory. So In the Afterlight. What is the speed of dark? Sounds like what is the speed of a black boy, or the speed of a stallion beauty turning corners? What about wild horses barreling down a Moroccan beach? What about a boy not foreign to me who sleeps in their path? What is the speed of dilations, or nervous systems, or involuntary, hardwired and on the fritz? What is the speed of forcible suspension, or the permanency of no return, or saying no and meaning no? Is it like the speed of being chased down, or the speed of light, or the sly of a streaming bullet? Is it like ripping through cells, I wish I understood the physics, for it sounds like bull ramming into windowless matter, almost like the speed of a power outage or powerless and underage. For what is the speed of returning to a dark or closing and opening a wound? Is it like bagging a body? I often wonder, what is the sound of the emergent spirit? Does it sing like a lark or spike like a nightingale? The next elegy, actually, Patricia and I were talking right before coming on, and she mentioned this poem. So I'm going to read this, called Turned Away from 30 Hospitals in 2 Hours. In the early 2000s, mid 2000s, there were a series of articles that were coming out, not about US hospitals, but hospitals abroad where they were over full, and people were being, they were trying to look for places, and a couple of the stories of people had died in the process. So it's not meaning to make any type of comment on religion. It's just sort of the awe of that experience. Turned away from 30 hospitals in 2 hours. I don't love her, but like a fly, I could not pass her by. I wanted to kiss her hands and ribbon the feet with more than fog. Rub thyme and olive oil into wrinkles overstretching into nests. I wanted to toss her a white church near to stream and build a boat timbered small to her frame and send her name off as if she rolled from a river who never grew so tired to wake her. But don't wake her. No need wake her. She is a dead world. This next poem is, well, I'm a first generation kid. I'm a little older than a kid now. But my parents became citizens here. I was watching a masterclass with Amy Tan, and she had this exercise on looking at old photographs and using a magnifying glass and sort of looking at the sort of cracks in between. So this poem is called In Preparation for Ascendance, and it's looking at an old photo before my mom came over here to the United States. Consider Kingston, Jamaica, 1976. Notice in the photo how your mother in a miniskirt, body spiking as a royal palm, is 3 months pregnant and not smiling. Notice where she looks for protection, as if holding her exposure within her hidden self, while a few miles away, political parties riot with their flintlock triggers and ratchet knives as police round up and decimate the trench town. Now consider being shown how the arugula has gone to seed decades later in front of your New York home. Note how some of their liberal heads have crossed the broken police barricade. Then look again at your beautiful mother, squinting beyond the frame at plumes rising toward a nimbus cloud shaped like the United States. See how the keyhole burns? This is well, some of us poets, I guess, are, writing at least one pandemic poem. I don't know if we mean to, but this is mine. And I was really sick, and my partner threw his back out, and we had kind of run out of food. So he's a farmer and stuff. So this poem is a little bit about foraging. It's called When He Loved Me the Most in Quarantine. During the pandemic, it was his idea to forage for cleavers around Queens when our food grew scarce. From the stoop, I would watch him crouch on one knee, his bare hands between telephone poles, pulling up the green stars from their control joints under our mailbox full of clover mites and commercial flyers. I almost forgot how sprawl could be so quiet. When he returned inside, he rinsed the street off the tendrils, then placed the rolled lot free on his tongue, then on mine. My girlfriend from India mentioned how sticky foods can be a delicacy, but I wouldn't say in this moment how I like the stems whirling themselves within my throat, or when he watched me gasp and then strain as I pulled sections of their straw-like bodies from my mouth. I wondered, did I fail this test? And later in the night, and with pleasure, he read to me about how Indigenous women ate cleavers to prevent pregnancy. I didn't realize he would announce our aftermath so clearly. And this last poem, since there are probably a lot of writers in the house, is about process, right? Sometimes I'm a well-carved straggler inside this kid. Sometimes I'm a beginner rubbing my nicked billard again. Somewhere I'm a lifeguard inside downing on the observers, while sometimes I'm the halter falling from shoulders and I switch panic for play. At some point I was swimming in boys too big between the high five divers and push play under the panic. But you never quite had the water in the cry because you burned in timeshares and kissed as a wet deposit does, chemicals on chemicals. And for you, I'm only the next inhale, and I'm only a fern gully of green. And sometimes you are a mouthful of sand, and sometimes I'm a good shot put spitter, but I will crawl forever to the edge of almost just like you. And yes, sometimes I'm drowning in the saved and a stroke in the tide pulley. Sometimes I'm a sheet surge, the pond, the ocean, the drool string, the coconut split. I'm a worm and can't breathe. The morning dove is playing with its form. I'm drowning when I can't see you, but you see me. And yes, sometimes you do see me stopped at the shoulder when the I am is folded down. And someday I will actually no longer be for sale. I'll be just like barnacles of one forgetful after another, or perhaps just missing in the garage. And the blamer of tall tale garbage as you look for me and play kitchen gloves panic on your face as I console the yes, here I am still, somewhere in the damage, hushed in a mountain dumpster green, where I will be resting. And yes, I will be resting with you. Thank you, everybody.
All right. Thank you so much, Michelle. Your poems were stunning and you read them so beautifully. So thank you so much for sharing those with us. So we will hear from you in a little bit. But up next, we have a reading from Patricia McCormick. Patricia is a two-time National Book Award finalist, the author of several critically acclaimed novels, a picture book, and she also co-authored I Am Malala. Patricia's books have been named to the New York Times Notable Books list, Publisher Weekly Best Books list, NPR's Best Books list, and iTunes Best Book list. Patricia has also been awarded fellowships by the New York Foundation on the Arts, the Virginia Center for the Creative Arts, and the McDowell Center. So please welcome to the screen, Patricia McCormick. Hi.
Thank you. Hi. Hi,
Hi.
Michelle. That was absolutely inspiring and stunning, and I'm so happy to share this virtual stage with you. I'm going to read an essay that is a work in process. It's called Assassins. My youngest sister is angry with me. It started with a misunderstanding about my plans to visit and take her son to the mall to buy Christmas presents. It ended with her throwing a box of chocolate-covered cherries at me from the open door of her car as she sped out of the parking lot. Let the record state, I was wrong, she was wrong, we were both wrong. The next day, she posted an image on Facebook. Facebook is, of course, a public platform, but when I opened my laptop and saw an image of an army sniper in full camo, his face obscured by black netting, his rifle cocked, I knew, because I knew my sister, that this was a message aimed at me. Don't underestimate me, read the all caps caption. I know more than I say, think more than I speak, and notice more than you realize. I was safely back home by then in my apartment in New York, 3 hours away, but still it unnerved me. That was 5 years ago. We haven't spoken since. Let the record state that I've emailed her several times, asked to talk, offered to meet in person, invited her to my daughter's wedding. She wants nothing to do with me. I tell people, I even tell myself that I don't understand what happened that day at the mall, but that's not true. I say, I don't know what I did wrong, and that's not true. I think I do. When I try to figure out how our relationship fell apart, I keep coming up against the problem that I'm only one of us, which is like trying to untangle a necklace with one hand. And no matter how much I try to look beneath the incident at the mall, my attention keeps being snagged back to her Facebook post and what she might have been trying to say. I try to imagine my sister searching the internet for just the image to convey her fury. I picture her late at night in her home, a ranch house near the suburban development where we grew up, a giant Notre Dame flag on the wall in the living room, our parents' old mahogany bed in her room, her car with its personalized license plate parked in the driveway. Her 15-year-old son is asleep down the hall. At her feet are an assortment of cat dishes. I can see her computer screen, the eerie white glow in the violet darkness of her home. Her finger hovers above the keyboard, and with one tap, she lobs a bit of pixelated artillery through the ether. It lands in my apartment, spraying shrapnel everywhere. When I try to figure out what I did wrong that day, I can get by with only one of us. I called her out for making a mistake on the date and time of the shopping trip. I told her she should apologize. I wasn't willing to change other plans I had. I was patronizing, riding into town like Lady Bountiful to spread my riches at the capital city mall. And years before that, I left home when I was 18 and she was 8, deserting her with a volatile, sharp-tongued mother and a weak, unprotective father. And later, as an adult, I left her to care for our parents as they aged, and our mother's bitterness became a toxic gas that permeated the landscape. My sister was stuck there in the trenches alone. But I don't think that's what I did to make her angry with me. Back in the old days, before I left for college, she and I had a special bond. A chubby little tomboy with button eyes, Denny was the youngest of the 4 girls in our family, and I was the oldest. Our middle sisters, Chris and Kate, only 2 years apart, formed a pact almost immediately. That left the 2 of us, youngest and oldest, at either ends of the sister continuum. When I was 13 and Denny was 3, I decided to forge an alliance with her, spending my babysitting money on presents for her, creating scavenger hunts for her, sending her mail even though she couldn't read. It cracked me up when at age 4, she called me her buddy old pal. When we became adults, we kept up our buddy old pal partnership. She reached out to me when she wanted advice or was in trouble. Before there were cell phones, we once stayed on the phone for nearly 2 hours while she worked up the courage to leave an abusive boyfriend. He was asleep in the next room, and I stayed on the line while my sister packed and snuck out. But now my sister is so angry she's broken all contact with me. Still, I worry about my buddy old pal. I think she's lonely because I'm not the only one she's feuding with. Back when we were still in contact, she used to call and tell me in righteous detail about fights she was having with coworkers, about epic grudges she kept and complicated traps she laid for her coworkers. I'll just come in on the weekend and change things back, she once told me. More recently, the targets of her anger were her son's teachers. After one meeting where the comments were so blistering, the teacher refused to be alone in a room with her anymore. I saw her becoming my mother. Perhaps that's the worst thing I did, not telling her that. But I was afraid of the very thing that actually happened, that she'd cut me off. No, the reason behind the blow up at the mall is this. I named our father as a child molester. Years earlier, more than 20 years ago, I'd told my sisters each in turn that my father had abused me when I was 6. It had only happened once, and I remember it with painful clarity. But the shame and confusion that followed was in many ways as bad as the abuse itself. And while I prayed that nothing like that had happened to my sisters, I had to find out, for my sake and potentially for theirs. They told me each in turn that nothing like that had happened to them. They also made it clear they did not want to hear about my experience or ever talk about it again. I took their answers at face value, and I took their silence at face value. They hadn't been molested. They didn't want to talk about me being molested. I accepted that. I always suspected that I was the only one who'd been abused, so I wasn't surprised. I was mostly relieved. Relieved that nothing had happened to them, relieved that they hadn't told our mother, and relieved that my revelation hadn't caused a huge family rupture. Another person might have realized that under that mannerly silence was something darker. I wasn't that person. I was the person who was willing to accept silence in lieu of rejection. I did notice that my 2 younger sisters treated me a bit warily after that. Denny, the youngest, seemed dodgy whenever I called, eager to get off the phone. She was by then deeply involved in caring for our aging father. When I visited, she seemed to make a point of showing me how well she understood him, even though Alzheimer's had rendered his speech almost indecipherable. Meanwhile, she played roughly with him, tipping him back in his wheelchair while making a joke about popping wheelies. One gesture struck me as possessive, the other as hostile. Kate, my other sister, seemed to avoid me at family gatherings, but that wasn't a total surprise. She'd always kept a certain distance. Chris, the one closest in age to me, acted almost afraid of me, and yet she hung in there, calling me at least once a week as she had before, and the two of us preserved a genuine closeness. We maintained a kind of demilitarized zone, which only became dangerous if I trespassed into conversations about our childhoods. For the next several years, the 4 of us retreated into separate lives. Until our father died. The night before the funeral, I saw that my name was no longer on the list of speakers at the funeral program. Somehow, between the day of his death and the day of the wake, it had been decided that I wouldn't be speaking. No one had told me, but somewhere along the line, my sisters must have blackballed me. Did they really think that after keeping my father's secret for more than 3 decades, that I'd announce it from the pulpit at his funeral? I guess they did. And all at once, I was once again that little girl alone with the shame and confusion of incest. I was, even in my very adult black dress and heels, once again the child that my father had used, then set aside, untouchable. I became wordless. I staggered through the wake that evening, unable to really put sentences together. I don't remember much from those days, but when my mother and sisters and I went back to my parents' house afterwards, I ate candy, apparently, a lot of it. I remember this because Denny teased me about it. The next day, I sat in the pew, numb, watching her give the eulogy as if from a vast distance. And I ate a big slice of cake, apparently, at the luncheon after Mass. Denny, who'd gotten heavy in the past few years, teased me again. "What are you worried about?" I said, my muteness suddenly gone, my tongue now a loaded weapon. "That I won't fit into my size 2 dress, unlike you?" My mother's daughter, I knew exactly what to say to wound her. None of us spoke for some time after the funeral, only in brisk hostile terms, as I tried to piece together why my name had been taken out of the funeral. My mothers and sisters each blamed each other or said they knew nothing about it. I suspect it was mainly Denny's doing, the kind of long fuse trap she used to set for her coworkers. But when one of my brothers-in-law referred to my investigation as funeral gate, I knew I had to stop. A new, more fragile truce ensued. A year or so after our father's death, when Denny adopted her son, an adorable 4-year-old boy from Haiti, all hostilities ceased. I loved him at first sight. When he, unable to speak English, indicated he wanted to go swimming at the hotel pool where I was staying, I jumped in fully dressed just to make him laugh. Gradually, he decided he would get in too, clinging to my neck the whole time. Over the next 10 years, he and I became buddies. Our annual trip to the mall to buy Christmas presents for his mother, Denny, the center of my holidays. Denny would give us a list, slippers, electronics, and we would also freelance a heart-shaped locket, a Notre Dame blanket, a box of chocolate-covered cherries, the candy I'd given her back in the old days. As I think of that Notre Dame blanket now, I'm reminded of how like my father she is. She's an accountant like he was, proud of all things Irish like he was, and she has a personalized license plate just as he did. She loves cars and football and corny jokes like he did. She did pro bono accounting work for Catholic organizations, just as he had. She faithfully visited him in the nursing home, just as he had done with his mother-in-law. He was her hero. And as the youngest, as my buddy old pal, she loved me the way a baby sister loves a big sister. She held my hand until she was 12. She sent me homemade cookies in college. And she worshiped my husband. One Christmas when she was still in elementary school, my husband joked that he loved any gift that came in a box from Krigo's, a local men's store. She then announced that she was going to wrap herself in a Krigo's box. She bought me chocolate-covered cherries with her babysitting money. With the blindness of the oldest child, I see now that I was a hero to her, too. As I sit here in the comfort of my sunny office, years away from that day at the mall, I look again at the image of the assassin my sister posted on Facebook, and I think I understand what happened. When I told her about our father, I killed off something precious for her. I not only assassinated his character, I destroyed the image of the father she thought she knew. I also broke the bond between the two of us. As her buddy old pal, I was supposed to be the one who took care of her, not the one who hurt her. In my need to address the harm I'd suffered, I caused harm. To her especially. And I realize only now that all those years since I told her about our father, she may have been torn between her love for him and her love for me. Perhaps she became wordless too. Maybe she staggered through the next few years unable to reconcile competing visions of our father. Perhaps she was rendered numb by the impossible wish to remain neutral as one of her heroes sullied the other. She'd probably been silently, unconsciously furious at me all those years, building up resentments, nursing 100 slights, all the while caring for my father while I was far away, unaware. So when I criticized her for screwing up the Christmas trip to the mall, it was her turn to become the loaded weapon. She pulled up outside the department store and dropped her son off, speeding away without acknowledging me. When he and I got inside for the scant 45 minutes we would have together because of the schedule mix-up, He dutifully delivered a message from her. My mom says not to buy her anything this year, he said, not able to look me in the eye. She says she'll just throw it in the trash. He swallowed, like she does every year. We were standing in the middle of a crowded display, wedged between circular racks of women's clothes. I felt myself wobble a little. I didn't think this last part was true. I bought her things she'd asked for, some of them expensive. I had a feeling she was just being mean. Or rather, she was showing me that she was willing to use her son to be mean. I looked at him, this kid who'd brought my sister and me together, as he was being torn apart. I said, okay, we wouldn't shop for Denny, but we'd still buy a few things for him as we always had. After we paid for his new clothes, we walked toward the designated pickup place. We were tight on time, but when I passed the store that sold the chocolate-covered cherries, I dragged him inside. Would a box of candy be a good peace offering? I asked him. He didn't think so. I should have listened to him. I reached across the passenger seat as my nephew got in, handed my sister the candy, which she threw at my head as she drove off, the car door still ajar. I stumbled around the parking lot, too shaken to drive, unable to take in what had happened. I finally called my best childhood friend. She made a joke about the two of us going back to fish the chocolates out of the gutter, and then she came and picked me up. The next day, my sister posted the picture of the assassin. Since then, I've come to think that when a family secret is revealed, it's like an underground nuclear detonation. There's no mushroom cloud, no visible fallout, but there is a blast zone and concentric rings of damage. In an atomic explosion, the rock closest to the blast is vaporized almost instantly. Farther out, the substrata is cracked, or in physics terms, irreversibly strained. With a family secret, those closest to the truth suffer from shame. Those further out, denial. The nuclear unit is irreversibly strained. The shock waves reverberate for years. The half-life, it seems, infinite. I may be the ground zero in this scenario, but all of us, my sisters and I, are the collateral damage. Even now, my nephew, whether he knows it or not, is in the fallout zone. Incest. It is a weapon of mass destruction, one that keeps claiming more casualties, causing victims to take up arms against each other. Once again, I find myself looking at the image of the assassin. We are both assassins, I decide, my sister and I, with a special capacity for hurting each other. And while at first I thought Facebook was an oddly public and distant way for her to convey her anger, I get it now. It's safer on the far end of a fiber optic cable. It's safer on my end of that cable too, I realize, as I type these words and send them into the ether. Thank you.
Whew. Very powerful.
Likewise. What a great forum this is for sharing
Yeah.
really personal things.
I'm so curious. That's a newer essay, or okay? Did that take you a long time to? Is that something you're like thinking about over the years? Like, do I talk about my family? Is it worth putting down on paper and sharing with people? Do you want to talk a little bit about that process? I know there's some writers who are working on similar kinds of, or, there's difference between conjuring it onto the page and nobody needs to see that, right? That's for you to, but then there's sort of the public forum. And I'm sure that's part of thinking about the process too, but would love to hear like just about your process, even emotional process through that.
Thanks. Yeah, I've wrestled with this for a very long time, and I think as you just said, so many writers do wonder about what is my story, and where does my story affect other people, and what right do I have to tell the stories that are tangential to mine. I have been thinking about this piece obviously for a really long time, and didn't feel able to write anything worth writing until I approached it with compassion for both of us. And I know there are ways in which I still convey a lot of anger toward her, but in the end, I feel really sad for both of us. And think it was only in being able to get that distance on it that made me feel as though I might have something to say that might be valuable both to me. I figured it out as I was writing it. I don't know if that's something that you do too, but that would also be worthwhile or valuable or helpful to somebody else. That said, this is the only place I've read it. And I forced myself to do that today because I have been hiding it. And this moment gives me the courage to think of it as something that might have a place in the public sphere. How
Yeah.
about you?
No, all that makes sense to me. Yeah, I mean, I don't, even the poem about like my mom is difficult because it's her story. And yes, she might have been pregnant with me at the time, but I think I tend to feel safer thinking on the outskirts, right? And then slowly moving into the subject. But, there are poets who can do that in poet form, like what you just did. It's not my go-to, but I'm trying to sort of understand like tension in a situation or decisions that were in a situation. I mean, you chose an essay, right? I'm sure there are different ways you could have maybe talked about that. But I do think that process does allow, just gives more room to think about, well, what are those details, or how did that even, like the whys, pretty much, where I don't necessarily have to do that in a poem if I choose to. You know what I'm saying? So it's really important, I'm sure, to a lot of people who are listening right now, that you said it in an essay form, in a narrative form, from your point of view, right? And also what you chose not to share in the essay, which is so difficult. Do you want to talk about that?
You know what? I was just going to ask you the very same thing. Do you mind if I go first and we can come
Oh
back
yeah,
to me?
sure.
I was absolutely thinking, in particular, on the last, not on the last poem, the poem about the when I loved you most during the quarantine, the white space in that piece. There's so much happening. There's so much reverberation in there, and it requires involvement and attention from the reader or the listener. But I'm guessing that there's a lot in that white space that's not in the actual poem. Can you talk about that sorting process?
I think, well, that poem is newer. So, but I guess similarly, it might be a subject that, obviously not the pandemic, but the thought about having children in a world that seems to be a sky falling all the time. Being, a Black woman, bringing children in, and those questions. I mean, those have been inside me since I was young. But now that I'm in my sort of reproductive years, and choosing not to, you know, there's that wondering that I make the right decision or not, you know. I don't know, there was something about even the cleavers just popping up everywhere, doing what they need to do and be, you know, propagating their offspring through cracks, through, you know, there's a beauty there, right? Even if it's in the city. And then a nourishment that it could be, thinking about, you know, first responders and the first line, the people who've been working this whole pandemic, with food, you know, and thinking about that whole process to get that delivery to your doorstep. And while my partner's out there using his bare hands to feed us, and I'm sick, right? And thinking, how could I bring a child? I'm sick in a pandemic. So there was just a lot of questions, and I'm sure that was just more about process, I think. So I didn't know that the poem was going to end up in those little narrative threads, but it seems like it's for another poem if I want to talk about my reproductive or the actual pregnancy or having children. It wasn't for this particular poem. So what about you?
I just wanted to add that I saw those cleavers as this kind of irrepressible life force too, during the pandemic and during this moment when you are wrestling with decisions about your own desire, whether or not to have children. What did I leave out of this piece? I feel like I felt as I was reading it, like, gosh, I put everything in, including the kitchen sink. But it's so hard in essay form, at least. I wish I had the compression of a poem to describe this thing. It felt hard in essay form to cover the complexity of a lifelong relationship with my sister and the other sisters and my father without consciously including all kinds of things, and to go back and forth in time. I mean, this poem covers 50 years almost. So I also chose, this was not the poem about my dad. I'm sorry, poem. This is not the piece about my dad.
No,
it
seems like it's about your sister, actually. That's what I was the most drawn to, that you're almost like, you don't want to take back what you said. I mean, that was your truth. But if you could somehow heal your sister in the process, I mean, that seemed very apparent. And that's the sadness that I was feeling throughout. It was almost like a letter to her, like, I'm still here. I'm still here for you.
I don't know if she would read it that way, but there were ways in which that was my intention.
Yeah.
And to give us both a platform or an opportunity to kind of sift through all this stuff and figure out how we were both hurt. And is there some common ground there where we could return?
Yeah.
Can I ask you, since I asked about life force and things growing, I was struck by how often your poems include these really vibrant images of life from the animal world and from the plant world. You know, your mother, comparing your mother to a royal palm, comparing, I didn't remember if it was your cousin or your cousin's cousin in the first poem.
Yeah, the latter.
As a stallion. And these are such succinct and loaded with meaning choices. It sounds like you're an urban person, or you have been an urban person for a lot of your life. So I'm wondering about the natural. No, that's not true. So tell me about the natural world in your poetry.
Thank you. I don't know if anybody's ever asked me that, but I really appreciate it. It makes me think a little bit of like Hart Crane and this idea that your environment sometimes dictates your rhythm, right? So I spent a lot of time around trees and nature. I'm one of these people who are not afraid to walk in the woods necessarily alone, even when the sun has gone down. I don't know if I want to get lost, but I find it to be a sort of sanctuary. And even if I walk the same paths, there's always something new to observe. And I do think it takes time to observe. And that's what excites me, I guess. On Instagram, I used to, some of my friends made fun of me, but I used to take pictures of my dead roses once. And
you are a poet. I
know, but I didn't see it as like a morbid thing. I saw it as a natural beauty, and in terms of the life process. I bought it off a shelf, but I'm trying to think about its life before it hit that shelf. So I bring it in my home. I take care of it as best as I could, and then I let it go. And the way it lets itself go is just it's so beautiful sometimes. So I try to just kind of capture that, because it will be gone, and then I'll have that image, right? So I don't know. I seem to be attracted to writers who are able to do this too in their writing. When I was younger, I liked Flannery O'Connor. I know she's a little controversial in terms of race relations, but I did like her use of the natural world in creating mood. And I used to read over certain passages. How did she do that? How did she make me feel about this character, but we're looking at the sky? So I don't know if I necessarily, in terms of craft, set out to do that, but I think some of that might have infected me a little bit. And plus, I just feel like nature just teaches us so much about our own decisions in terms of our own species, and the decisions we make that are not the best decisions, or just maybe even the relationships on how to sort of work with the land, and what's our role, what's their role. I'm just always thinking about those relationships. And then I guess there's a part of me that is a cynical, possibly, that if I talk about this young Black man in college who had his whole life, I mean, how if you can think of any of your friends, most people here have been in a car where you're playing loud music. We see it in the movies, we see it in the media. There's no reason for this child to have been murdered, period. So, but I feel like there are people who still won't hear that. They will hear the nature before they hear what actually happened. And that might be my cynicism. And that's not to everybody who's joined us today, but I feel like that's what the world also teaches me. So you kind of choose your battles, or you choose your weight, where to pan the camera, if that makes sense.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
I was struck in that poem too about the kind of the contrast between speed, which you referenced several times, and permanence.
Yeah.
The permanence of his death, the complete extinguishment. I don't know what the right word is. His life was extinguished.
Yeah, like that. Yeah. So I mean, that's the helpful part about art, I suppose, or writing, or doing what we're doing right now. That's where I get to hide and to grieve, and then decide whether I'm going to share that with other people. Most of my teachers have taught, if one person connects, then that's good,
Yeah.
But, do you typically write for yourself? Is that how you got into writing, or how did you get into your journey of writing?
I started out as a newspaper reporter, and I still do a lot of long form journalism. And so I'm a demon researcher. I don't necessarily credit myself with having a great imagination. So I use a lot of facts to as a structure on which to build my fiction. I love facts, and yet they're so inadequate.
Yeah.
And they're not that trustworthy, or they're kind of flimsy. They're not really even facts, depending on who's holding them and who's presenting them. In something like this, do I write for myself? Yeah, I'm really writing to figure myself out, and figuring out and looking back to say, okay, these characters who were my family, with love and compassion and understanding and a little bit of imagination for all of us, how do we get there? And it gives me a kind of peace. It gives me a kind of, certainly it gives me a sense of power over what was something over which I was powerless. It gives me a way to manage what was unmanageable. And usually it happens right on the page. It's not like I have a great insight and rush to put it down. It's in the process of putting the words on the page, putting the characters in motion, that the light goes off. And so I do think of that as a kind of divine intervention or some kind of transcendent experience, because that's not just me working through stuff on the page. There is some greater kindness or some greater force that runs through my fingers on the keyboard. It's a lot nicer than I am in real life.
I doubt that. I mean, the fact that you're taking time to, to revise, right? To think on the choices that we make, as a writer, I think that says a lot, Hi, Lori. Sorry, Lauren.
Hi. Hi. I hate to interrupt because I am on the edge of my seat here listening to you, but we do have a couple of questions, so I would like to get to them before we finish for the evening. So this first one is from Iris. She says it's for both of you. When is your favorite or best part of your day to write, and why?
Do you want to go first, Michelle?
I'm a morning person, so I do like to write in the morning. I feel I'm super clear. I like to go for a walk, nature walk, and I also love the process of revision. So I usually might write in the morning, and then I put it away. I don't really read it right away. Sometimes I'll tape record, or not tape record, audio record it, voice memo it. Got to catch up with the digital world. And because I have tape recorders around, so that's why I said that. And then I'll come back to it maybe in the evening or the next day and listen to what intrigues me about anything, that I was talking about. And as like Patricia was saying, sometimes the writing kind of starts to dictate what it wants to say. And then I have to go along with that journey. So yeah, that's pretty much my process. How about you, Patricia?
Absolutely the same. Anything good that happens in the morning, revision, email, that kind of thing in the afternoon. I'm also a walker. I'm also a voice memo person, because I also find that when I'm walking and I'm disengaged from the computer, I really do have my best thoughts. And if I don't record them, they're gone.
Yes, that has happened to me too. Yeah.
Okay. Now this one is from one of our writers, Laura Tucker. I guess this one is for Patricia. Was writing the essay liberating, or has it been more liberating as you live with your words? That's a good question.
It was liberating to write it. It was painful to also have to be accountable for my side of the street, to look at what I did. Not painful, that's not quite the right word. It's a bit a sobering kind of thing, because we all love our victim stories. And I think the victim story has a real place in the world. And I don't mean to trivialize the victim experience or make it sound like it's a weak or a kind of place that you shouldn't be in. But until that harm story is read aloud or is heard by someone else, you can't let go of it, I don't think. Anyhow, I think we need witness. And even if the witness is just me putting it on the page for my writers group, something changed for me. Everything changes.
Okay, and then we have one more. This is from another one of our writers, Adrian Unger. This is another one for you, for Patricia. It's such a deeply moving story, Patricia. Lots of writers are talking about how the isolation during the pandemic has affected their creative work. Do you think you would have written this now if it wasn't the pandemic year?
Absolutely not. There was something about the vast open time that I had during the pandemic, the days where there was nothing on my calendar, that allowed me to stay with it and forced me to not get up and walk away and go do something else. Did you find that too, Michelle, that there was a different kind of writing done during this period?
I don't know. I was kind of sick last year, like really sick. And then the protests, I had a lot of friends in those cities. And so I spent a lot of time with people on Zoom, just listening and consoling. And so, and then I did write. I did do some writing and some revisions. So yeah, I was one of these people who could eventually start getting some of that out. But I know there's lots of writers who could not really write during that period of time.
All right. And then I'm always just curious, if you weren't writers, this is for both of you, what would you do for work? I always think this is interesting. Let's see, Patricia, you look like you have a good one.
Oh, I would own a bookstore.
Oh, that's a good answer.
It's the only thing I feel capable of doing to make a living. Michelle?
I have a whole background in music comp, so I wanted to be a film composer.
Wow.
And was my trajectory until I changed it. So I think I would go back and try and do that.
So you play a lot of instruments?
I played piano, and I did play violin when I was younger, but another life.
Does your musicality affect your writing of poetry?
I think it plays a role. Yeah. I'm sound oriented. I can't help it. But in college, they had us set a lot of poetry too. So I had to really think about those choices on a craft level, I guess. But yeah, I really wanted to write music for the big movies.
Oh, that's super cool.
You may still.
Yeah, you never know. All right. Well, that just about does it for us. It is 8 o'clock. So I want to thank you both, Michelle and Patricia, for being here with us and for sharing your work with us tonight. It was a real treat. Thank you to everyone who tuned in this evening. And of course, thanks to the big man, Roger Rosenblatt, for putting Patricia and Michelle together and giving us this wonderful evening. So don't forget to click the button below or visit bookreview.com to buy signed copies of Patricia and Michelle's books. And I hope to see you all right back here next Monday at 7 p.m. for more readings and conversations from Grace Schulman, Lance Morrow, and Nell Painter. So we will see you next week. Bye.
Good night. Thank
Good
you.
night.
Great to meet
Thanks,
you, Michelle.
everybody.